Here's how I played a live set using just the Launchkey Mini and Ableton Live. First thing I'm going to show you is how to take a finished track and convert it into a live set. So here I have a song of mine. This is a lo-fi track. This is the complete 100% finished project. Even have the mastering on there, and I'll turn that off. So let's listen to this track a little bit. As you can see, I have a lot of tracks here, and exporting can be a little bit overwhelming, so I'm going to utilize grouping. So the way I do it is I kind of have 4 main groups, one just for drums, one for bass, and that's usually a singular track unless I'm doubling up something. And then all my chords are just going to be in one giant group, so basically all the melodic stuff, minus the leads that I want to be playing myself. FX, drums, bass, chords. And so once I have them grouped together like this, I can decide, oh, this is a lead that I want to play, so I'm going to make sure that's not in my group when I'm exporting it. Because I don't want that in the track, I want that to be something I'm performing live. Also, let's say for instance that you play that lead at the beginning, but later on you do want that in the backing track. So what I do is I just put that lead back into my giant chord group, and I'm just going to do some automation here. So now I can export that, and my lead is only going to exist where I'm not going to be playing it. So at this point I'm ready to export. I'm going to solo the FX group, and you're going to want to export this as a wave, of course. You're going to want high quality stems for your live show. And I kind of just keep them in a live set like this, like these are the stems for all the songs that I've done this to. And how I do it is I just do an abbreviation for the track, underscore FX. And sometimes I do add the BPM, because that is something we need to know later. Okay, so I'm exporting it. Just going to do that for each of these groups here. And one thing I will say about exporting is that when you're putting together a live set, you're going to have multiple tracks. You want to make sure that they're relative volumes to each other before exporting. I kind of aim for about -6. That's kind of my go-to pre-master volume. In my live set, there's going to be a limiter that they're all going through. And it's not the biggest deal, you can definitely fix it later, but as soon as you're getting started, it's helpful to set that stuff up. Okay, I'm in a brand new live set here. Just going to go to my stems. I kind of have just a separate folder for my live stuff, but whatever you do with it, you want to keep these stems in a place that's not going to move. It would be unfortunate to be trying to play live and all of a sudden you have some missing stems. Yeah, so first thing I'm going to do actually is set my BPM for 70. That's the BPM of that track. Just copied my lead in there. Then I'm just going to make 4 audio tracks. Then I'm going to drag in my live stems. Just going to name these so it's nice and clear. And then as I'm doing this for every track, they're always going to be formatted this way, so I'm going to have these 4 tracks for every song I do. Yeah, so this comprises my song, and then I just have the lead that I copied, so this is the part that I would be playing. And I won't delete the MIDI information right away, just because sometimes you need a reminder of what you played exactly, and until you get it down, it's kind of nice just to have as a reference. Also, if I just undo the automation that I did, I can hear the full song as it is, and that can be helpful. And then one more thing I'm going to add actually is a blank MIDI clip. And I'm going to have that spanning the course of this song, and I'll get into why I'm doing this later. Next, what I typically do is I'm just going to organize these by section. Just going to cut them into separate clips, so each section, they're going to be separated. And if you want to, you can also make locators if you want to see it super organized, but we're going to be moving out of this view relatively quickly, so I don't think that's super necessary. Yeah, so how I might do it is say this is my intro. Then when the drums come in, that's my first section. You see I kind of have another quieter part, that'll be my other section. And you don't necessarily need to follow the format of the song, verse, chorus. It's more however it is that you want to work with the samples that's going to make sense to you. So basically I just have these 4 different sections, and they're clipped like this so I can select them all as one. Yeah, next we're going to move it to session view. Just going to use shift to click and have this whole thing selected. Then I'm going to be holding it down and hitting tab. Now I can just drag it in like this. And they're just all lined up exactly like that. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that for each of my sections. I'm just going to ignore the MIDI down there for now. That's just a reference for me. Alright, so I just have all my clips laid out like this. And then at this point we'll get into a little bit of organizing and how we're going to use this view. So if I look over on this view by the master, I have all my scenes that I can activate. Just gonna move my arrow until I get this little icon and I can pull out. Gives me more information. First thing I'm gonna do is set my BPM to this first spot here. Just moving it up a little bit so it's activated, and then down to 70, which is our BPM. So what that does is once I activate this clip, it's going to set the BPM to 70. And that's not a big deal right now because we just have one song, but as you have multiple songs, it's really useful to just have that BPM automated. Next here, I sometimes find it helpful to give these names. I might start with just the name of the track. That way when I'm looking at several tracks through my whole view, it can find them really easily. Right now, if I just click this scene, it'll just play through the first one. If it's a shorter sample, the default in this view is it's just going to loop. When you have longer samples like this, it's kind of assuming the opposite, so it assumes you just want to play it once. So if I just played this and let it go, once it reaches the end, it's just going to stop. So what we can do is we can set these up individually and decide what we want them to do once they reach the end of the clip. Just going to double click on the drums here. And then in this area here, I'm going to click this arrow, then click follow action. This is defining what happens after a clip reaches its end. So one that I use a lot is next, meaning that when this clip is done, it just moves right on to this one. It's going to sound just like the song. It's going to go right from one section to the other. So taking a look at some other options here, I'm going to click this. Stop. That's kind of what it's defaulted to right now because it's a longer clip. Play again. So this is going to loop indefinitely until I change it. And typically you want your scenes to be doing the same thing. There's exceptions of course, but typically I would want these all to be acting as either looping or moving on to the next section. The best way to do that is to just select and use shift to highlight all of them. I'm going to click follow action. And now I'm just affecting all of them. So let's say we just want to go right on to the next section. So this will be my intro. I'm going to start the track here. It's going to go through. And then all these clips are moving right on to the next clip. And part of the reason we formatted like this is that each clip and each scene is the same length. So if one was a little bit shorter, then it would be moving on to the next clip faster than the others. And I just want them all acting together. Maybe on this next one, I might loop it. So the benefit of setting up samples to loop like this is my hands are free to perform. I can improvise, I can make it longer if I want to. And as soon as I want to move on to the next one, I would just activate the next clip on my MIDI controller. And depending on how the loops are set up, you probably want to do that at the end of the loop. So rather than in the middle, because it might sound abrupt. But if I click this towards the end, just a nice smooth transition. And you might have noticed that if I click it, it doesn't start right away. It goes to the next bar. And that's because our global quantization setting is set to 1 bar. And that's this box right up here. You can change this to whatever you want, even as quick as a 30-second note. But I find 1 bar works the best for me. You can kind of mess around and see what makes sense to you. It's also worth noting that even though that's the global quantization, you don't necessarily need to follow that for every clip. So I'm clicking on my bass here, looking at the bottom, the quantize is set to global, but if I want to, I can change it. And if you set it to none, that means this clip is going to play just as soon as I set it. And for most clips, you probably don't want that. For most of these, I would just keep it to global. There are some situations where you're playing maybe a drum sample or a vocal sample or something that you want to just be able to throw in without concern for the timing. And that's really useful to have that. So I got my instrument here. Yeah, so it's pretty self-explanatory. I just have that track armed. None of my other tracks require me to have them armed. This can just be my lead. And that's great for one track. But when you're having multiple tracks, you're going to want to change your lead instrument. So let me show you how to do that. Just going to move my lead over to the right here. Then I'm going to show you why I had us chop up the MIDI information earlier. I'm actually just going to move all this over to my lead track. I'm going to delete that. Double click on my lead here. Just have a single lead instrument in massive. A little bit of processing, and that's specific to that lead. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to click my VST. I'm going to hit Control G. And now it's a goop. And I'm going to bring all that processing into that as well. I'm going to click this icon. Now I see them as an instrument rack. I'm just going to add one other instrument, tile bassline. So right now, if I press a key, those instruments play together. But obviously I want to play them separately. I don't want them playing together. I'm going to hit the chain button. What you see now is I have a grid from 1 to 127. And I can assign each of my instruments a number on that grid. Next, I'm going to hit this icon, opening up my macro tab. This thin blue line here is what instrument is currently selected. I'm going to right click that, map it to macro 1. Now it becomes a chain selector, and as I move this macro, it moves what instrument is selected. So you might think maybe we assign this to a MIDI controller, and that might work okay. It's rather sensitive, but there's a way better way to select your instruments. So now I'm going to come back to these MIDI clips, and my MIDI clips are mapped the same way as every other instrument in the scene, meaning that if they're looping, it's also looping. If they're going on to the next clip, they also are going on to the next clip. I'm going to double click on the first MIDI clip in this session. I'm going to go over to this button. And you see it's already at my instrument rack and it's already on my chain selector. I can automate the chain selector to change instruments as I change scene to scene. So this first one is going to be 0, since I want to be using massive, and that's what massive is mapped to. Just for the sake of example, I'm going to have the next section mapped to my bass. Massive is playing, but tau bassline is not. You can see that by this tiny meter right here. Then in the next section, tau bassline is playing and massive is not. So you see that's a really useful way to play multiple instruments in the same live set or even in the same song. And that's something you could manually set up as well. I could have that be a clip separate from the rest of them that just changes my instrument and just happens once. But I think sometimes you do want it to happen automatically, just so your hands are free to be ready to play that part. So that's a massive time saver, and there's a way we can actually make it even better. So doing this for a full show, you could have a lot of instruments here, and that's going to take up a ton of CPU. Because one flaw with this setup is that all your instruments are on all the time. So even if you're not currently playing them, they're all sucking up CPU. And just recently I found a great workaround for that that's all within instrument rack and is super easy to do. So I'm just going to hit this map icon. I'm going to right click on my clip activator, map to chain selector. I'm going to click this arrow here, and it's given me a value system here. So what I can do is set this where it's only on when I'm at 0. So basically now as the chain selector selects different values, it's only going to be playing the instrument that's on that value. All other instruments are going to be deactivated. So basically what that means is my CPU is not being drained by having all these instruments on. It's only going to be focused on the instrument that I'm currently playing. Which at first I didn't think this would actually affect CPU speed, because I see massive is still on in the track. But I got this tip from Ableton themselves, and just from my own experience, it does save a lot on CPU. And all that just to cover the setup and the organization of clips. I'm going to have another video where we dive into using the launch key, how we're going to perform with it, how we're going to get sound into a sound system in a venue, all that good stuff. See you next time. Peace.